Okay, hello, my name is Michael Blodgett.
Hi, I'm Yuriko I'm a third year medical student at Nara Medical University.
Great, thank you, Yuriko. And I'm an English teacher at Nara Medical University, and we are here to share our poster, Producing a Podcast During the Pandemic. There's lots of information that we'll get to in a moment, but just briefly, I'd like to give you the background to how this all kind of started. So before the pandemic, our university had a special research clerkship program, and several students every year are selected for this program. In fact, the best of the best, great students, but also students enthusiastic about English and the opportunity to study overseas. And we've had students every year go to America, Europe, and other countries in Asia. And it's always for second year students. In fact, Yuriko was a second year student last year. And I think this is the type of program she would have been an excellent candidate for. Unfortunately, as we all know, the pandemic came out of nowhere. And from the spring, all of the classes at our university suddenly went online. And so us teachers were trying to figure that out. We had no system set up for online classes and not a lot of support for it because it was such a new thing to our university. And unfortunately, uh, much like other academic institutions around the world, study abroad programs were typically canceled. In fact, travel for tourism as well. And in Japan, they basically closed the borders to outside tourism and canceled a lot of the outbound programs, including at our university. And so it was pretty disappointing because I typically teach a class that helps prepare students like Yuriko for that clerkship. And I know how disappointed they were that they weren't going to be able to go overseas, especially because it may be their only opportunity in their 6 year medical program. There's very little chances outside of this research clerkship program. So with that, the classes for that program had been canceled, but I thought, is there something that I could do to maybe recreate some of the opportunities that students would get going overseas uh, to some degree? And so I happen to be really into podcasts. I've been listening to them quite a bit for leisure and for study, often Japanese study. And I thought, well, podcasts for English study could be great too. And I would sometimes recommend them to students. And then I thought, well, wouldn't that be great to maybe create our own podcast? And so I quickly set up a class and I advertised it to the student body. And it was in the second semester. So many of them already had their plans for that semester. But luckily, a lot of students signed up. Uh, Actually, I have to say I'm joking. Yuriko signed up. Thank you, Yuriko. And so Yuriko signed up, and she's a great student. I'll let her get to this in a moment, but she's very enthusiastic about studying English and speaking English. In fact, Yuriko, you hope to possibly practice medicine overseas in the future,
Mm,
right?
Yes, I'm very interested in working as a doctor in the US in the future, and now I'm studying hard to pass USMLE, United States Medical License Examination, to get residency in the future.
That's fantastic. So, yeah, Yuriko's working really hard. A lot of this study in her own time on top of her regular medical education. But she joined the class and she was very eager and enthusiastic. And I basically said, we'll learn a little bit about podcasts and then let's try to start one and see how it goes. And now we're into our third semester. Yuriko has stayed on since the beginning, which has been great. And in this poster, we'd like to share some of the great things that Yuriko experienced especially, but maybe the other students who ended up joining afterwards as well. And Yuriko can get into that in a moment. So with that background, let's go ahead and get into the poster. Let's start with the online section. Yuriko, please tell us your ideas about that part.
Okay. The coronavirus is spreading all over the world, and in Japan, the number of patients is reducing now, but there are about 100 to 200 patients. So there is a small number of students in a class, or the class is completely online. That being said, we can record together thanks to the technology. We usually record on Zoom, and later Michael edits them, adding some background music and sound effects.
Great. So yeah, that's fantastic. So we've been using Zoom. It's a really easy way to record and to meet without having to come to the university. And you mentioned, Yuriko, it's a great opportunity to familiarize yourself with some recording devices and broadcasting systems. So can you tell a little bit more about that experience, how that's been for you?
Yeah. Before I took this class, I've never learned about the broadcasting systems like YouTube, but now I know how to express myself to the world, making a podcast.
That's
I'm
fantastic.
always excited by recording with a cool microphone.
That's right. Yeah. So after we started out kind of bare bones, just recording on an iPhone mic or or a laptop mic, but we invested in a nice microphone, much like you see many YouTubers use, and it's quite fun. It feels even more real, like a real show. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on next to the very creative section. Yuriko, please share your ideas on that.
Okay. Every time we make a new episode, I try to prepare and memorize specific vocabularies. For instance, before I talked about the journey to Oita Prefecture, I checked some terms for texture of food and transportation to describe the details of my trip more exactly. I think this is a good chance to acquire new idioms.
That's great. Yeah. So usually we would meet, whether it's Yuriko and I or some of the other students, and maybe come up with the concept for that show, that episode. And oftentimes, Yuriko, especially in the beginning, would look up a lot of terms and we would do some rehearsal and practice those. So that was great. Besides
Yeah.
that, what else can you tell us about the creative section?
Yeah, a podcast is also a very practical way to improve English. Um, we usually have a little chat for warming up and record lively conversation with classmates and guests. To be honest, it's challenging to make a quick response in English, but I think this is very good practice for us to speak at natural speed.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So over time, I would have to say, now that Yuriko has been doing this for over a year, I've even seen a great improvement in her ability. Maybe at first, uh, there were a lot of challenges, but I think it's getting a lot smoother. And hopefully, as Yuriko is saying, it's a great practice for the students. Anything else you'd like to share about the creativity?
Yes. Before taking this class, I've never done these such creative things, but through this class, I felt that doing something creative and expressing myself to the world is more enjoyable than I expected. I
That's
really appreciate this opportunity.
that's great, Yuriko. And looking here, it says original topics and stories. Can you think back? We've done quite a few episodes now. What are some of the topics that you enjoyed talking about?
Well, I enjoyed recording some tasting, such as juice from vending machine and the snacks from convenience store. It was fun to try tasting with classmates and discuss the taste and the fun.
That's great. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, we've done a lot of as it says, our title of our podcast is Medical Student Life in Japan. But part of being a student is not just studying. So we sometimes do Japanese cultural things. And as Yuriko said, we've done a couple taste testing episodes, and those tend to be quite popular with the audience. We've even gotten some comments recently about our Japanese snack tasting podcast, which was great. Okay, let's move on to the third section, listeners' data. Would you like to talk about that?
Yes, I think a podcast enables us to connect with people all over the world because we can see listeners' data on a certain platform named Anchor. It shows us their listeners' nationality, gender, age, listening platform, top episodes, and place.
Yeah, great. So as it says here on our poster, we can see the listeners' data as Yuriko pointed out, and we've had listeners from over 40 countries. Yeah,
Yeah, that's great.
that's always surprised us. Which countries surprised you the most, Yuriko?
Well, I expected that the listeners are mainly from the US, UK, and so on, but
Hmm.
um, there are some listeners from other countries like um, Vietnam, Macedonia, Poland, and many other countries. I was really surprised to see the data.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think we imagine it's an English podcast, so maybe, yeah, more than likely some English-speaking countries and possibly Japan, of course, because it's related to Japan. But we have been really, really excited and impressed to have listeners from all these places around the world. And yeah, it's pretty motivating, I think, well, for me, and I think for the students as well. Um, you mentioned in the listeners' data section some comments. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, surprisingly, we sometimes received some comments from listeners, and one of them is a female medical student in Cuba. And we recently made a contact with her to try interviewing and make a new episode together.
Yeah, that's right. So, um, yeah, really connecting with the world is been a big part of it, and started from having this listener, and she's a medical student, and then after some communication through email, we were able to actually interview her, and actually that was one of our really popular episodes. So I think people like this uh, interaction between countries as well. Um,
Mhm.
let's go to that last part of Yuriko. You said makes us feel we are connecting with people all over the world. Can you go into a little more detail about that?
Um, as I said, by some comments and listeners' data, we can imagine the listeners who we've never met, but we can feel the connection between them.
That's great. Yeah, so kind of coming full circle here, we started out in a very difficult situation, and as you can see at the upper right-hand corner of our poster, in the middle of every difficulty lies opportunity, and we were able to take a difficult situation and with a little creativity and enthusiasm, we were able to start something new and continue it for over a year. And I think we'll be able to continue it much longer. And even since then, Yuriko and I have been able to present on this topic at some conferences, including now here at JALT. So it's been really exciting. And I love that part that Yuriko put down, connecting with people all over the world. And that's something they would have been able to do with the research clerkship, and I think at least in a little way, Yuriko feels good about, even though she couldn't go overseas for 3 months, she's able to have a much bigger impact on the world and the other students as well. Um, can you go into that at the very end? What has changed from when we first started until now as far as the podcast and our members?
Um, Last year, I've taken this class with Michael only, but this year, luckily, we got several new members, and each member has his own unique personality and some hobbies. So I think that the variety of episodes got wider than before, which I believe is more beneficial to our listeners.
That's right, Yuriko. Great job. Yeah, so we have more people to participate, and yeah, maybe more stories to share with the world. And so with that, let's just finish up with a couple details for those who are interested. Um, as you can see in the bottom of the poster, it says, here's our podcast link. You can click on the Medical Student Life in Japan, and that'll take you to the web page, the anchor page for our podcast. You can also see in the upper left-hand corner QR code. So if you'd like to access it that way, it'll also take you to the anchor page. Anchor is the website that is the platform for producing podcasts. Of course, if there's people out there who like podcasts and are already listening, we are also available on all the other platforms like Google and Apple, Spotify, and many others. So wherever you like to listen to podcasts, if you type in Medical Student Life in Japan, you're sure to find us. Last but not least, my email address is there underneath our names, and we would love to get some comments or feedback. So please feel free to send us an email with questions or topics that you might like to hear, or any feedback would be appreciated. And who knows, maybe we'd love to have you as a guest someday. So let's go ahead and finish up. Yuriko, thanks for your hard work, and thanks to all the audience who's coming to check out our poster. We hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks.